Hello, Internet. Welcome to Only Kind of Everything, and in line with the idea of everything, a subject that we don't normally get a chance to talk a lot about is gaming. Now, there is a lot that's been going on, and unfortunately, I wouldn't necessarily call any of it good. So, we're going to dive right into it and talk about Koei Tecmo and Square to begin with. Both of these big companies talking about how they're going to be taking losses this year. Koei tecmo not throwing a number out, but they adjusted projections by lowering them. I think it was like 22%. Now, if you don't know, Koei Tecmo is mostly known for their Dead or Alive franchise, as well as like Ninja Gaiden, stuff to that nature. I think it's an interesting thing as somebody who enjoys the Dead or Alive franchise. Spoiler alert. Dead or Alive in of itself has kind of changed, especially in Dead or Alive 6. They went away from kind of the sex appeal of what Dead or Alive had used in the past to sell itself and tried to market itself as a different version of itself, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Times change and consumer preferences change. Unfortunately for them, it looks like the fan base that supported Dead or Alive was not along for that change. Dead or Alive 5, you want to talk about bad DLC and products to that nature. Dead or Alive 5, a lot of their season passes, and I believe there was 10 in total in that ballpark. There was a lot of them. Apologies for the sniffing. I'm coming off of some garbage. There were several DLCs. Each of Dead or Alive 5's DLC season passes were about $100. And I mean, you're looking at, $60 buy-in, plus these season passes, plus these characters, and a lot of the season pass stuff was literally just extra costumes. That's what they made a lot of money on. Dead or Alive 6 tried to use the same formula, but because they went away from their, let's call it their core audience, but that's effectively kind of what they did. They listened to the pro gaming side of it, and they were met with the pro gaming side of the audience kind of saying, no, we don't want this product, and their core audience going, well, you're not servicing us anymore. Maybe not their core audience, but the audience that was willing to spend $100 multiple times on costumes, saying we're not really willing to support this product. That audience no longer was getting served. So Dead or Alive 6 kind of was in this weird kind of just, dead on arrival type of thing. Koei Tecmo is still servicing their Dead or Alive gacha game, which is available in other countries, not in America. They do have other products under their wing. They have been re-releasing Fatal Frame games for the last several years, which I'm not going to complain about. I got to play 2 games that I wasn't able to play originally. And, there's talk of potentially re-releasing 1 and 2 and 3, maybe doing a new one. I'm happy with just about any outcome in that. But the next company has kind of almost been associated at the core at this point with bad business, and that's Square. They have reportedly going to be losing, I think it was 122 million US dollars. So I think it's 2.2 billion yen. I think was the report I read. I mean, it's either way, it's an insane amount of money for a company that has been around since, effectively in some form, since, the Nintendo. And I think part of their problem, there's a few problems they're running into. The first thing you want to look at is, for whatever reason, their games that their bread and butter used to be just aren't performing. And I guess, there's a definition of what Square defines as a success. Obviously, the Marvel stuff was a failure. Marvel's Avengers was just an absolute wreck of a game. Guardians of the Galaxy was actually fantastic. The problem is that, in my opinion, Guardians suffered from the fact that it came out after Marvel's Avengers, and they're like, well, we just want to get this out and get it out of the way, so they didn't put the machine behind it. If they would have put the machine behind Guardians of the Galaxy, I think that game would have done really, really well. If you haven't played it, do yourself a favor, go do it. Now, I think something a little more relevant to current, you have Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. You have Final Fantasy 16. Both of these games, great games. I'm currently playing Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth right now, and I love it. For me, it stumbles upon the issue I have with open world games, that it's easy for me to get distracted and lose interest in the open world aspect, but the story beats, once I get into like the linear story part, like Remake was more of, I just plow through that stuff. Now, I think, people want to point out and say, oh, well, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth isn't selling as well as Remake did. I think that's twofold for that. The first is people are like, well, we know this is the second in a trilogy game, so why would I pay $60, $70 at this juncture, for the middle of the game? I would digress and say that that's probably part of it. But if you want to compare the sales for Rebirth to Remake also came out during 2020 when the world was being shut down. So people were getting that opportunity to just play a game, and Final Fantasy VII is a game that I really think it was going to do well to begin with, but it did extra well because of that, because people didn't have anything better to do. So I think trying to compare Rebirth and Remake's sales are kind of unfair, but it is a fair point out to say that something like Stellar Blade, the demo was allegedly outperforming in terms of user interaction than Rebirth. And I do think that comes down to the consumer going, this is not even the full story. A lot of people are probably going to, at this juncture, just say, I will wait for whatever this third game is, potentially DLC to this, like they did with Remake, where they added the integrated DLC that added Yuffie. There's always that potential that, hey, maybe they add some kind of extra DLC to Rebirth. Maybe we can play as Vincent some more. So it'll be an interesting story to follow and see how that tracks. But Square, their idea is right now to streamline. We're going to cancel some stuff and refocus. And that concerns me. They've sold several studios and several properties. I don't know if they still own Parasite Eve from the Squaresoft days. That was one of my favorite properties. I would love to see it make a return of some kind. I believe they still own the rights to that. That could have changed, and that might change in the future, depending on how they want to deal with this astronomical loss that they're going to be accepting, or not accepting but taking. I guess they just have to accept it because it's happened. But as somebody who grew up with Square and Koei Tecmo to an extent, because the Dynasty Warriors games was something else they're really big on. Any of your hack and slash warrior style games was them. I'm never the type of person to say, oh, I hope people lose their jobs and everything. I want all these companies to succeed, but man, I feel like gaming is on the verge of a potential burst, and there has to be a meet in the middle where the developers are getting paid and producing quality content and the consumer's needs are getting met. I think it's interesting to look at that a lot of older stuff is kind of being looked at again. PlayStation 3s, PS2s, GameCubes, and Wii's, like that stuff is still being bought today because those games service the consumer better than the current generation. But I think that in of itself is a topic for another day. The next thing I want to talk about is probably one of the biggest messes I've seen in a minute. We're going to talking Helldivers 2. So, if somehow you've been under a rock, the quick version of this from the get-go on Steam, it had mentioned that at some point you would potentially be required to have a third-party account, i.e. a PlayStation account. That was not enforced at the beginning. Sony came out and said, hey, on, I think it was going to be May 6th, something very soon, if not like today originally, they said that it was going to be live. That caused huge, understandable backlash on the PC front. And more for the issue of not that they were requiring it, although there were people absolutely complaining that saying that, well, I don't want to have a PlayStation account. I didn't have to have one to begin with. But perhaps the more logical complaint was the people who were able to buy Helldivers 2 to begin with in countries where you couldn't have a PlayStation account. And I think that is where the real issue lied. There was obviously the outlying crying and complaining that these PC players didn't want to have this Sony account to begin with. Which, I'll be honest, I do stand on the ground that if it was there to begin with, there was a notice saying that, hey, you're at some point going to need this, just because it wasn't required to begin with, you were warned. But the fact that it was being made a requirement in a situation where it was going to cause the game to not be played in countries where it was being sold is where I have an issue with that. I do think that's some scummy business tactics. Now, Sony has backed off of that. They released a statement last night, I believe, on the 5th, where they basically said, hey, we are still learning about the PC side of things. We apologize. We are going to be removing that, so it's not going to be a requirement for Helldivers 2 going forward. And good on Sony for getting rid of that requirement, because again, you had this game purchasable in areas where your PlayStation account was not able to be created. So props on them for going and servicing these people, but the fact that they made this an issue to begin with is probably one of my biggest concerns, that they didn't care enough to consider, hey, if we're putting this game out for sale, we need to make sure that this PlayStation account thing we're planning is not going to affect our future players. Man, it's such a slippery slope to be on, because on one hand, Sony published the game. So if you want to get technical, it is their property. If they want to say, hey, we require a PlayStation account to play this game, that is within their rights as the people that published the game. Now, the developers were blindsided. They didn't know what was going on. That's not right to them. That makes them look stupid. And there's not really a good outcome. There's not a good way to look at this situation and it not have some messy outcome. I think, I don't want to say given everything that has happened to this point, Sony has taken the best course of action they can to try and rectify. They've removed that requirement, that it is not going to be present going forward, and they have apologized, stating that they're going to use this in future games that they bring to PC. Sony is a company. They are not one individual that you've known for years. You may have known the company for years, but Sony is a business and they want to do what's best for business. And in their eyes, having the player have a PlayStation account looks better because it says, oh, look, the number of people who have PlayStation accounts have gone up this year. That was the goal behind it. I don't know if that's the best way to do it. And I could probably sit and ramble alone about this for another 10 minutes and just kind of circle the not want to say circle the issue, but not really come to a good definitive, hey, this is what should have been done. But I do think Sony needs to, as a company, they need to take what has happened with this Helldivers 2 debacle and not just really, truly learn from this and go forward and realize that, man, and this isn't a dig, and it may come off as such, and I apologize if it does, but PC gamers can be fickle. They don't really like change a lot unless it's, upgrading the PC. They don't like being told what to do. That's just kind of why they don't go to a console to begin with. So Sony really needs to look at this situation and figure out if they want to use the PC side to go, oh, look, our numbers are doing better, then they need to find a way to make that happen in a way that makes sense. But guys, that's all I've got for today. I look forward to your likes, comments, subscription. Follow us on Facebook. We are on Twitter, X. Not as active on there, mostly due to me just not really liking the platform a whole lot. I'm not super active on Facebook either, come to think of it, because I'm not a big fan of the platform. But we are there. We do interact with, somebody reaches out to the page, we interact. But like I said, look forward to seeing you guys in the next video. Talk to you soon. Bye.